August 3, 1943. The road to Messina, Sicily. The heat in Sicily was not just a temperature, it was a physical weight. It pressed down on the dusty olive groves, the shattered stone farmhouses, and the endless columns of the U.S. 7th Army. General George S. Patton Jr. loved it. He stood in his command car, his eyes hidden behind goggles, his jaw set like granite. He was racing. Not against the Germans, they were retreating. He was racing against General Bernard Montgomery and the British 8th Army. Patton was obsessed with beating the British to the port city of Messina. He wanted the glory for America. He wanted the glory for himself. Faster! Patton screamed at a truck driver whose vehicle had stalled, blocking the narrow mountain road. "Get that junk off the road or I'll tip it over myself. We have a war to win." Patton was a man made of iron. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He lived on adrenaline and hatred for the enemy. He believed that war was the ultimate test of manhood. If you fought, you were a hero. If you ran, you were a coward. There was no middle ground. But the men under his command were not made of iron. They were made of flesh and bone. And they were breaking. The tent of misery. August 3, 1943. 15th Evacuation Hospital. Near Nicosia. The hospital tent smelled of iodine, sweat, and rotting flesh. The air was thick with the groans of men who had lost arms, legs, and eyes to German mines and artillery. Patton entered the tent like a storm. He was immaculate. His boots were polished to a mirror shine. His breeches were pressed. He wore his ivory-handled revolvers. To the bloody, dirty men on the cots, he looked like a god descending from Olympus. Patton moved slowly down the line of cots. This was his ritual. He wanted to see the cost of war. He wanted to honor the sacrifice. He stopped by a soldier with a bandaged stump where his leg used to be. Patton knelt down. His voice, usually a roar, became soft, almost tender. "You're a brave man, son," Patton whispered. "You gave everything. The country is proud of you." He pinned a purple heart on the man's pillow. He moved to the next bed. A man with his chest torn open. Again, Patton was gentle. He respected blood. He respected physical wounds. That was the currency of courage. Then he reached the last cot in the row. Sitting on a crate, fully dressed, was Private Charles H. Cole. He had no bandages. He had no blood on him. He was just sitting there, shivering, his head in his hands. Patton stopped. He frowned. He looked at the medical chart. It was blank. "What's wrong with you, soldier?" Patton asked, his voice rising back to its command pitch. "Where are you hit?" Private Cole looked up. His eyes were hollow, red-rimmed, and terrified. He looked at the general's gleaming helmet. I guess I just can't take it, sir," Cole stammered. "The shelling. I can't take it anymore." The air in the tent froze. Patton's face changed. The tenderness vanished. In its place came a shade of purple rage that his staff officers knew well. To Patton, battle fatigue or shell shock was a myth. It was a fancy Jewish medical term for cowardice. It was a contagion that could infect his entire army if not stamped out. "You guess you can't take it?" Patton repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "It's my nerves, sir." Cole began to sob. "I hear the shells and the slap." "Shut up," Patton roared. The sound was so loud that the doctors at the other end of the tent jumped. "I won't have it," Patton screamed, stepping closer. "I won't have a yellow-bellied coward hiding in this hospital while brave men are dying outside." Patton reached out with his gloved hand. Thwack! He slapped Private Cole across the face. It wasn't a playful tap. It was a backhanded strike with a leather glove. Cole's helmet liner flew off. The soldier cowered, covering his face. "Don't you cry," Patton shouted. "You are a disgrace to the uniform. You are a disgrace to your family." Colonel Courier, the hospital commander, rushed forward. "General, please." Patton spun around, his hand resting on the ivory grip of his revolver. "Get him out of here," Patton ordered the doctor. "Send him back to the front. You hear me? You send this yellow bastard back to the line immediately." Patton turned back to the sobbing private. He grabbed him by the collar and dragged him toward the tent flap. "I ought to shoot you myself, you son of a bitch," Patton yelled. "In fact, I should. I should shoot you right here, so you don't infect these brave men with your cowardice." He shoved Cole out of the tent. The soldier fell into the dirt. Patton stood there, his chest heaving, his face slick with sweat. He looked around the tent. The wounded men, the ones with the missing legs and the bullet holes, were staring at him in silence. They weren't cheering. They were horrified. "I won't have cowards in my army," Patton muttered, adjusting his tie. He marched out of the hospital, got into his jeep, and drove away. He thought he had just taught a lesson in discipline. He thought he had saved a soldier's soul. He didn't know he had just pulled the pin on a grenade that was about to blow up his career. The second sin. If it had happened once, it might have been buried. But Patton was on a crusade. 7 days later, on August 10th, at the 93rd Evacuation Hospital, it happened again. Private Paul Bennett was shivering on a cot. He had been in the line for weeks. He was dehydrated, exhausted, and mentally broken. Patton asked him, "What's your problem?" "It's my nerves, General," Bennett wept. "I can't stand the shelling." Patton exploded again. "Your nerves, hell. You are just a goddamn coward." Patton slapped him. Hard. Then he slapped him again. The force of the blow knocked Bennett's helmet into the next tent. Patton stood over him, screaming that he would not have stinking cowards in his hospitals. This time, the medical staff didn't just stand there. A nurse ran out crying. The Corps commander, General Bradley, heard about it within the hour. The doctors were furious. They were officers, too. They knew that combat exhaustion was a real medical condition. They saw it as a physical assault on a patient. A report was written. It wasn't just a casual note. It was a formal complaint, citing witness testimony. It detailed the slaps, the profanity, the threats of execution. It was sent to General Omar Bradley. Bradley read it and turned pale. He knew Patton was a genius, but this was court-martial material. Bradley tried to lock the report in his safe. He tried to hide it. But rumors in the army are faster than telegrams. The soldiers were talking. Old blood and guts had become our blood, his guts. The story began to leak. Trickled up the chain of command all the way to Algiers. The boss finds out. August 17, 1943. Allied Headquarters, Algiers. General Dwight D. Eisenhower was reading the morning reports. He was tired. Being the supreme commander meant dealing with British ego, French politics, and American supply lines. His aide handed him a file marked, "Eyes Only Patton." Eisenhower opened it. He read the surgeon's report. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "God damn it, George," Eisenhower whispered. He looked out the window. He knew what he had to do. According to Army regulations, striking an enlisted man was a court-martial offense. If this got out, the American public, mothers who had sent their sons to war, would demand Patton's head on a platter. They wouldn't care that he captured Palermo. They would only care that a general beat a sick boy in a hospital. Eisenhower picked up his pen. He had two choices: fire the best combat general in the U.S. Army and send him home in disgrace. Try to save him and risk his own command. Eisenhower wrote a letter. It wasn't a firing slip. It was a blistering reprimand. "I am challenging your personal conduct," Ike wrote. "This must stop. You will apologize to the soldiers. You will apologize to the doctors. And if this ever happens again, I will strip you of your rank." Eisenhower thought he could contain it. He thought he could keep it in the family. He was wrong. Because in the lobby of the hotel in Algiers, a famous American journalist named Drew Pearson was having a drink. And he had just heard a very interesting story from a doctor who had served in Sicily. The headline was already being written in Pearson's head. It was a headline that would shake the War Department to its foundations. American general beats soldier in hospital. The war in Sicily was ending. But the war for Patton's survival was just beginning. November 21, 1943. Washington, D.C. The bomb didn't drop in Sicily. It dropped on the radio. Drew Pearson, the most feared muckraker in American journalism, leaned into his microphone during his Sunday night broadcast. Millions of Americans were listening. "I have a story," Pearson announced, his voice crackling over the airwaves, "about General George S. Patton. A story the War Department doesn't want you to hear." Pearson told it all. The crying soldier, the slap, the threats of execution. He painted Patton not as a hero, but as a tyrant, a man who abused his power to assault a sick boy. The reaction was nuclear. The next morning, the White House mailroom was flooded. Letters from mothers, wives, and fathers demanded Patton's removal. Senators took to the floor of Congress, calling him a madman and a fascist. "He strikes our boys while they are down," one congressman shouted. "He is unfit to command a dog, let alone an army." In Algiers, Eisenhower watched the firestorm. He had tried to handle it quietly. Now he had a PR disaster on his hands. He called Patton to his office. "George," Eisenhower said coldly, "you have let me down. You have let the army down." Patton stood at attention. For the first time in his life, he looked small. "I did it to make them fight, Ike," Patton pleaded. "I did it to save their souls." "The public doesn't care about their souls, George. They care that a general slapped a private." Eisenhower slammed his fist on the desk. "You are relieved of command of the 7th Army." Patton flinched. The 7th Army was his child. He had built it. He had led it to victory. "Am I being sent home?" Patton asked, his voice trembling. Eisenhower looked at his old friend. He knew Patton was a headache, but he also knew that Patton was the only general the Germans truly feared. To fire him would be to give Hitler a gift. "No," Eisenhower said. "Not yet, but you are going into the freezer. You will go to England. You will have no army. You will have no command. You will keep your mouth shut, and you will wait." The apology tour. Before he left, Patton had to endure the ultimate humiliation. Eisenhower ordered him to apologize to every single division in the 7th Army. It was a grueling, shameful tour. Patton stood on a wooden box in front of thousands of men. Men who idolized him and men who hated him. "I am sorry," Patton barked into the microphone, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I acted impulsively. My goal was to instill discipline. I regret my actions." The soldiers stared back. Some booed. Some cheered. Most just watched the legend crumble. Private Cole, the man he slapped, was already back in a unit, forgotten by history. But the slap echoed in every word Patton spoke. The Ghost Commander. January 1944. Knutsford, England. Patton was in exile. While Bradley and Montgomery were planning the invasion of France, Operation Overlord, Patton was sitting in a damp English manor, walking his dog, Willie. He was depressed. He wrote in his diary, "I am destined to achieve the greatest things, but I am currently nothing." But the Allies had a use for him. The Germans knew Patton was the best American commander. They assumed he must lead the invasion. They couldn't believe the Americans would sideline their best player for a slap. So Eisenhower created a lie. He put Patton in charge of the FUSAG, 1st United States Army Group. It was a fake army. It existed only on paper. It had inflatable rubber tanks, plywood airplanes, and empty tents set up in the fields of Dover, directly across from Calais. Patton was the commander of balloons. "It's a goddamn circus," Patton complained to his aide.
"Im commanding at hate prop."
But it worked. German reconnaissance planes flew over Dover. They saw the tanks. They intercepted fake radio traffic from Patton's headquarters. Hitler looked at the maps in Berlin. "Patton is in Dover," Hitler declared. "Therefore, the invasion will come at Calais. We must keep the 15th Army there to meet him." Patton, simply by sitting in a house in England, was pinning down 150,000 German soldiers who should have been in Normandy. He was winning a battle without firing a shot. But it was killing him. The second slip. April 25, 1944. Patton couldn't stay quiet. It wasn't in his DNA. At the opening of a welcome club in Knutsford, he gave a small speech to a group of British ladies. He thought it was off the record. There were no reporters, or so he thought. It is the destiny of the British and American people to rule the world, Patton said warmly. The next day, the newspapers ran the headline, Patton excludes Russia from post-war world. The Soviets were furious. Stalin demanded an explanation. The Republicans in Washington demanded he be fired for playing politics. Eisenhower had had enough. He picked up the phone to call General Marshall in Washington. "I'm sending him home," Eisenhower said. "He's too much trouble. I can't trust him." Patton packed his bags. He sat in his room weeping. He told his aide, "I've done it this time. I've lost my chance to die in battle." But at the last second, a letter arrived on Eisenhower's desk. It wasn't from a politician. It was from General George Marshall. "Patton is the only one the Germans fear," Marshall wrote. "If you fire him, you extend the war by 6 months. Keep him, but keep him on a short leash." Patton was saved. By the skin of his teeth. D-Day. June 6, 1944. The greatest armada in history sailed for Normandy. Eisenhower, Bradley, and Montgomery led the charge. Patton sat in England. He listened to the radio reports of the landings at Omaha Beach. He heard about the slaughter. He heard about the bog down in the hedgerows. "They are moving too slow." Patton paced his room like a caged tiger. "Bradley is digging in. Monty is stopping for tea. They need movement. They need violence." He wrote a letter to his son. "I am like a horse in the starting gate. I can smell the race, but they won't open the door." The Breakout. July 1944.
Normandie, France.
The invasion had stalled. The Allies were stuck in the bocage country. Dense hedgerows that turned every field into a fortress. The British were bogged down at Caen. The Americans were bleeding for every yard. Eisenhower needed a sledgehammer. He flew Patton to France. Patton arrived secretly. He wasn't given a parade. He was given the Third Army. But this wasn't a ghost army. This was real. 200,000 men. Sherman tanks. Artillery. "George," Bradley said, pointing to the map, "we are stuck here at St. Lo. I need you to punch a hole and turn the corner." Patton looked at the map. His eyes lit up. The depression vanished. The old warrior was back. "I won't just turn the corner, Brad," Patton grinned. "I'm going to drive to Berlin and personally shoot that paper-hanging son of a bitch Hitler." The race. August 1, 1944. Operation Cobra. The breakout began. Patton didn't just attack. He exploded. The Third Army tore through the German lines at Avranches. And then Patton did something that terrified his own superiors. He ordered his radio silence to be lifted. "Let them know I'm here," Patton shouted. He ordered his tanks to bypass strongpoints. "Haul ass and bypass," was the order. "Don't worry about your flanks. The enemy is worrying about my flanks." It was a blitzkrieg in reverse. The Germans were stunned. They were used to the cautious British and the methodical Americans. They weren't used to this. Patton's tanks were moving 40, 50, 60 miles a day. He liberated city after city. He captured thousands of prisoners. He was moving so fast that his supply trucks couldn't keep up. In 1 week, Patton went from being the disgraced general in the doghouse to the savior of the invasion. But he had one problem. He was running out of gas. And in the north, Montgomery was demanding all the fuel for his own attack. Eisenhower had to choose. Give the gas to the safe, slow British general? Or give it to the wild American who had slapped a soldier? The politics of the slap were coming back to haunt him. Patton stood in his command tent, looking at his empty fuel gauges. The road to Germany was open. He could end the war by Christmas. "Give me the gas, Ike," Patton screamed over the radio. "I can eat their belts. I can drink their blood. But my tanks need gas." Eisenhower hesitated. And in that hesitation, the German army began to regroup for one last, desperate gamble. September 1944. The French border. Silence is the loudest sound in war. General George S. Patton stood by his lead tank, Thunderbolt. The engine was cold. The gun was silent. "We have nothing, General." his supply officer reported, looking at the ground. The fuel trucks went north. To Montgomery. Patton kicked the tank track. He kicked it so hard he bruised his toe. Eisenhower had made his choice. The politics of the coalition, and perhaps the lingering shadow of the slap, had forced his hand. He gave the precious gasoline to Field Marshal Montgomery for a daring airborne attack called Operation Market Garden. Patton was ordered to halt. The slapper, the madman, was put on a leash again. "They are losing the war," Patton whispered to the wind. "Monty will fail, and the Germans will rebuild." He was right. Market Garden was a disaster. The British paratroopers were slaughtered at Arnhem. The war didn't end by Christmas. Instead, winter came, and with it, Hitler's last, desperate roll of the dice. The Ghost Front. December 16, 1944. The Ardennes Forest. The Americans called it the Ghost Front. It was a quiet sector of the line, thick with pine trees and deep snow. It was where tired divisions went to rest and green divisions went to learn the ropes. At 5:30 a.m., the world ended. 200,000 German soldiers, supported by the terrifying King Tiger tanks, smashed into the thin American line. It was Unternehmen Wacht am Rhein, Operation Watch on the Rhine. The Germans achieved total surprise. American units were overrun. Thousands surrendered. Panic spread all the way to Paris. Even Eisenhower's headquarters was jittery, burning documents, fearing German commandos were coming to assassinate Ike. The Battle of the Bulge had begun. The room at Verdun. December 19, 1944.
Verdun, France.
In a damp, drafty schoolhouse, the Allied High Command gathered. The mood was funeral. Eisenhower sat at the head of the table. He looked old. Beside him were Bradley, Devers, and the British commanders. They were looking at the map. A massive blue bulge was tearing through their lines, heading for the sea. "We are in a grave situation," Eisenhower said, his voice grave. "The 101st Airborne is trapped at Bastogne. They are surrounded. If they fall, the road to Antwerp is open." Eisenhower turned to Patton. Patton was standing by the fireplace. He wasn't looking at the map. He was cleaning a speck of dust off his boots. "George," Eisenhower asked, "I need you to help. I need you to stop your attack in the Saar, turn your army 90 degrees north, and hit the German flank." The room went silent. It was a logistical impossibility. To turn an entire army, 130,000 men, thousands of tanks and trucks, in the middle of a blizzard on icy roads, while engaged in combat, it couldn't be done. "How long will it take you to reorient your forces?" Eisenhower asked. The other generals did the math in their heads. "For days? Maybe a week?"
Patton lit à cigare.
He puffed it once. "I can attack with 3 divisions in 48 hours, Patton said. A British general laughed. "George, be serious." "I am serious," Patton growled. "I have already issued the code words. My staff is working on it. I can attack on the morning of December 22nd. Eisenhower looked at Patton. He saw the same arrogance that had caused the slap. But he also saw something else. He saw the fire that had been missing from the Allied command. "Don't be a fool, George," Eisenhower warned. "If you try this and fail, you will be destroyed piecemeal." "I won't fail," Patton said. "They are the ones who stuck their head in the meat grinder. I'm just turning the handle." The miracle march. Patton left the meeting and drove into the storm. He had promised the impossible. Now he had to deliver. This was the moment where the slap became irrelevant. The very trait that made Patton a monster in the hospital, his obsession with discipline, speed, and absolute obedience, was the only thing that could save the army now. "Move!" Patton screamed at his MPs at every crossroads. "I don't care about sleep. I don't care about food. If a truck breaks down, push it off a cliff. We are going to Bastogne." The Third Army performed a miracle. In 48 hours, they moved an entire corps over 100 miles of ice-covered roads, in zero-visibility snow without radio silence. It was a symphony of violence, conducted by a madman. The prayer. December 22nd, 1944. Patton was ready to attack. But he had one enemy he couldn't shoot: the weather. The blizzard was grounding the Allied Air Force. Without air cover, Patton's tanks were blind. Patton called his chaplain, Colonel O'Neill. "Chaplain," Patton said, "I want you to write a prayer for good weather." The chaplain blinked. "A prayer, General? For the weather?" "Yes. I'm sick of this goddamn snow. I want a prayer to the Lord to clear the skies so we can kill Germans." The chaplain wrote the prayer. Patton had it printed on small cards and distributed to every soldier in the Third Army.
250,000 menn prayed for Sunlat.
"Almighty and most merciful Father, we humbly beseech thee, grant us fair weather for battle." The next morning, December 23rd, the miracle happened. The snow stopped. The clouds broke. A brilliant, cold sun shone down on the Ardennes. "God loves us," Patton roared. "Get the planes up." The sky filled with P-47 thunderbolts. They rained napalm and rockets on the German panzer columns. The road to Bastogne was cleared by fire. The relief. December 26, 1944. Outskirts of Bastogne. The 101st Airborne inside Bastogne were starving, freezing, and running out of ammo. They had held the line against overwhelming odds. But they couldn't hold forever. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, whose name would later grace the M1 Abrams tank, was leading the tip of Patton's spear. "Don't stop," Abrams ordered his tank crews. "Drive through them." The Sherman tanks smashed through the German encirclement. At 4:50 p.m., the lead tank broke the perimeter. A weary paratrooper looked up from his foxhole. He saw the white star on the tank. He saw the dirty, exhausted face of a tanker. Patton had arrived. When news reached headquarters, Eisenhower wept. The gamble had paid off. The slap was forgotten. The old man had done the impossible. The river. March 22, 1945. The Rhine River. The Battle of the Bulge broke the back of the German army. Now it was a race to the heart of the Reich. Patton was obsessed with being the first to cross the Rhine. He built a pontoon bridge in record time. Halfway across the bridge, Patton stopped his jeep. He got out. He walked to the edge of the pontoon. He unzipped his fly. And in front of his staff, the photographers, and the history books, General George S. Patton Jr. urinated into the Rhine River. "I've been looking forward to this for a long time," he grinned. He sent a message to Eisenhower. "I have crossed the Rhine. I didn't need any airborne support. I didn't need any British help. I just walked across." The final tragedy. The war ended in May 1945. Patton was a hero. The slap was now just a footnote, a quirky anecdote about a brilliant, eccentric warrior. But peace was dangerous for Patton. Without a war to fight, he became restless. He started talking about fighting the Russians. He started criticizing the denazification process. The press turned on him again. Eisenhower, now a politician in the making, relieved him of command of the Third Army. Patton was exiled again, this time to a desk job. December 9, 1945. Patton was going pheasant hunting. He was sitting in the back of his Cadillac limousine. "What a war," he said to his friend, General Gay. "What a hell of a war." A truck turned in front of them. The crash was low speed. Everyone else in the car was fine. But Patton, the man who had survived bullets, shrapnel, and the wrath of his own government, was thrown forward. He broke his neck. He lay in a hospital bed in Heidelberg for 12 days. He was paralyzed. He hated it. "This is a hell of a way to die," he whispered. On December 21, 1945, the lion slept. The verdict. Decades later, a historian found Private Cole, the man Patton had slapped. Cole had lived a quiet life. He worked at the Bendix Corporation in Indiana. He swept floors. The historian asked him, "Do you hate him? Do you hate Patton for what he did?" Cole thought for a moment. He looked at his hands. "At the time, I hated him," Cole said. "I wanted to kill him, but after the war, I read about the Bulge. I read about how he saved the boys at Bastogne. I realized something." "What?" "If he had been soft," Cole said quietly, "if he had been a nice man, we would have lost the war. He was a son of a bitch. But he was our son of a bitch. The slap was a sin. But in the terrible arithmetic of war, Patton had paid for it with 1,000 victories. And somewhere, in the Valhalla he believed in, George Patton was probably standing on a cloud, looking down at the peace he helped build, polishing his ivory-handled revolvers, waiting for the next trumpet to sound. The end.